If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself.
The Last of Us Part 2 is not a normal game. It's about anger, revenge, being uncomfortable. Not just the characters in the game being uncomfortable, mind you, but the players themselves. In spite of Part 2 fighting itself in the attempt to become the next must-play gaming masterpiece, it still manages to deliver fantastic character interactions and world building. Initially, I was going to do a spoiler-free section of this review, but that method just would not be able to convey much about how I feel about The Last of Us Part 2. So this video is full of spoilers. If you just want to score or whatever, click wherever I put a skip button somewhere on the screen. Probably the bottom. Yeah. And for context going forward on this review, I did not see spoilers ahead of playing the game, so my experience was not at all altered by the leaks. Now, if you don't want any spoilers, get out while you can. Go. There is absolutely no doubt that Naughty Dog showed their technical mastery with how The Last of Us Part 2 looks and how the world interacts with the player. Part 2 is an artistic marvel. The models, textures, voice acting, characters, animation, and world details of this game are all top-notch. Almost no other games come close to the set pieces that The Last of Us Part 2 creates. While I am curious how much crunch this level of artistic display took, the skill, mastery, and love that the devs put into this game is evident and awe-inspiring. I absolutely adored visiting faithful recreations of portions of Seattle that have been taken over by a combination of nature and survival over the past few decades, especially places that I've visited myself in the past. It was pretty surreal and just cool to see. Where art is a bright ray of sunshine for The Last of Us Part 2, gameplay is a lot more gray. All of the systems in the game have been improved since Part 1, from gunplay to crafting to stealth to adding the abilities to dodge and jump. Part 2 improves on its predecessor, but not as much as I would have liked in the past 7 years. Gunplay is still shakier than makes any real sense with weapons in the hands of experienced users like Ellie and Abby, and stealth still has some jank to it. The biggest issue I have with the gameplay of The Last of Us Part 2 is just how repetitive it is. Almost all of the puzzles are the same at their core. The number of locked doors to get around in this game is just incredibly frustrating, gets really old over the course of nearly 30 hours. And the same feeling applies to the waypoints that you work towards throughout the game. I found myself reacting with a lot more of, holy shit, just let me be at the next part already, instead of being excited to fight through the next abandoned cordyceps-filled building. This just shy of 30-hour game felt as long as a 60-hour game between the tone and the amount of dragging present. There are so many zombie quicktime events, so much time spent holding triangle to open pathways, and so many occasions of longingly gazing at the aquarium in the distance that I would really just like to fucking arrive at already. The inside of the aquarium was beautiful, but that Ferris wheel on the horizon? Burn in hell. Hate it. Don't want to see it again. This happened enough that I heavily considered not finishing the game at multiple points. The added 3 hours of the game to trounce through Santa Barbara at the end really just didn't resonate with me. There were enough narrative paths that they could have ended the game right after Seattle without adding that entire extra section of content. The most satisfying and least repetitive part of the game for me was an open world section early in Seattle Day 1. Unfortunately, that section's pretty short, and there are no other open world sections like it through the rest of the game. Getting that taste of fun open world design just to fall back into corridors for the entire rest of the experience just ended up disappointing. On the positive side of things, the AI in this game is drastically improved, and the design of some enemies combined with their AI is fantastic. The Seraphite faction within the game uses whistling to communicate, and while playing through the chapters with that faction, I spent a lot of time just listening to the NPCs whistle to each other. Over the course of those chapters, I felt that I knew what a lot of the whistles meant and was able to predict NPC movements with that information. You could really tell when one of them whistled noticing a dead comrade or that someone hadn't checked in, that they were going to walk over to a certain section of the map. Now let's address the two really large elephants in the room. One, Joel's death. I'm gonna be real here, folks. I know we all had a connection to Joel from part 1, but Joel was an unrepentant mass murderer. He spent time as a hunter and wiped out the home base of the Fireflies and prevented the creation of a vaccine to save the rest of humanity, all without giving the girl he saved a choice in the matter. The only type of death befitting Joel was a brutal one. In this story of vengeance, a trigger was needed. No one other but Joel could have brought the emotional pain and rage fuel that would propel Ellie and the player to be even remotely okay with the suicidal, vindictive mission at hand. When playing the game, Joel's death shouldn't even be a surprise. Want to know when I knew Joel was fucked? Right here. Right here. Right before you get to play Abby for the first time.
Maybe find a way to lure him out.
The part of Joel's death and the start of Ellie becoming an angel of death that doesn't make sense is Dina. Dina's been dating Ellie for 24 hours, if that, when Joel is killed. Apparently 24 hours is enough time for Dina to dedicate her entire life and existence to Ellie, risk life and limb for a chance of dying with Ellie in some foreign land instead of chilling somewhere safe and warm. How fucking crazy and stupid do you have to be to do that?
You go, I go. End of story.
Elephant number 2, the Abby switch. I had some problems with this section, but not for the same reasons I've seen online. The Abby half of the game did a really great job of humanizing Abby and most of the WLF, even if I wasn't too fond of some of them. The purpose of this section was to make it abundantly clear that both, or technically all three, sides of this conflict are fucked up. No one is the good guy here, but Abby is closer to one. We are meant to feel that Abby was justified in her pursuit of Joel and merciful in not killing Ellie and Tommy in the beginning, which I was already on board with. Abby learns that the Scars, or Seraphites, are not all faceless enemies part of a cult hive mind. Many of the Seraphites are people. Where the switch really didn't land for me was the gameplay and the time it occurred. Abby, a woman who had been training non-stop for the past 4 years for the sole purpose of killing Joel, has diddly shit in the skill department. The skill reset here really brought down the game a notch for me. I already had built Ellie up. I don't need to start from scratch with a new character halfway through. On top of that, give the woman a combat knife. I thought we moved past shivs in the first half of this game. Why are we taking steps backwards in the design? Seriously, you lose access to almost all of the cool tools within this game too, for half of its duration. Skill reset mostly aside, I felt as though Naughty Dog went for shock value in the timing of the switch, instead of making the characters run in parallel, which would have made more sense and made me feel worse for the decisions Ellie was making in her sections along the way. Even something like playing Ellie Day 1, Abby Day 1 and 2, Ellie Day 2 and 3, Abby Day 3 would have felt more evenly paced and led to more remorse for the characters that we killed. To bring in some more positives on the narrative side of things, I really enjoyed the development of many of the side characters, especially Lev. Naughty Dog really fleshed out and made me love a lot of these characters that aren't always in the spotlight. As someone who had a lot of issues growing up in a family of devout and sometimes backwards religious people, I was able to relate to a trans character in a video game more than I really thought I would. In the same vein, the inclusion of a diverse set of characters and beliefs was handled extremely well in my opinion. Another positive was the flashback sections. Every single one of these flashbacks either provided key information for the relationships between different characters, or was there to rend your heart to pieces. The museum sequence, especially with Ellie and Joel, hit me. It showed Ellie learning to swim and emphasized Joel's ever-growing, soft, fatherly side that would eventually lead to his death. For the last portion of this review, let's chat quickly about the ending. While I absolutely hated that Tommy's plot armor kept him alive, Ellie left her life again to chase revenge for no good reason, and Ellie all of a sudden forgot how to bandage a wound from a pointy stick, the very end of the game was done exceptionally well. Ellie finally reached the point of realizing getting her revenge will cost her everything, but took too long to reach that conclusion. She traveled 1,000 miles to kill someone who was already broken and near death. Only when she was seconds from her goal did it really hit her. It wasn't worth it. Upon finally returning to the farmhouse, Ellie really had lost everything. Dina and JJ had left and taken everything that didn't remind them of Ellie. Ellie could no longer play the song she loved the most with the loss of her 2 fingers. And she never even got the revenge that she sought out. We're left with an ambiguous ending, similar to part 1, where Ellie leaves the farmhouse and the game's starting screen shows that Abby and Lev reach their destination of Avalon on Catalina Island. In summary, The Last of Us Part 2 is a game that dives deep and sorrowfully into seeking revenge for the deaths of fathers. While an artistic masterpiece, The Last of Us Part 2's narrative is constantly battling with pacing issues, repetitive gameplay, and a focus on shock and making the player feel uncomfortable instead of narrative cohesion. Above all else, The Last of Us Part 2 is a complex game that I definitely recommend talking about with friends or strangers and coming to your own conclusions. I give The Last of Us Part 2 a 7 out of 10.
If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself. Everything I have found here, I'm not found by myself. Try and sometimes you'll succeed.